I'm Taylor. I am a developer advocate at Red Hat. Today I'm going to talk about a question that I hear a lot and I talk a lot about in the different conversations that I have. And that's about how do I run my own models? Why would I run my own models? Why do I need to run my own models sometimes and not just use ChatGPT for every single use case? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, Jane here has a really good question, okay? Why would I need to host my own models when I can just pay a couple of bucks and get 1,000,000 tokens from OpenAI, okay? She makes a really good point, right? Because how many of us use some version of ChatGPT, Claude, all those different, Gemini, all those things, yeah. It's fast, it's easy to get started, it's cheap in most scenarios for a lot of, especially like individual use cases. But to Jane, I would say, why would you open your own small business when you could just go to Walmart, everything's cheaper, I can just use Amazon? Or why would I buy my own car if I could simply take a taxi or take an Uber? So before we talk about kind of the infrastructure specifics of how we can make this happen, I want to simplify things as much as possible, and I want to think about this like we think about transportation. Now, a hosted API service like Gemini or ChatGPT that a lot of us use, I think of this like using a taxi, okay? You send a request, you get a response back really quickly, it's easy, you get from point A to point B quickly, it's cheaper than buying your own car, for sure. But you don't have any control, right? In a taxi, if you think about that experience, you don't really have control over the car. The most you can get with Uber is like black versus regular or whatever the tiers are. And if you're in an Uber, you probably shouldn't be having confidential conversations or, inappropriate private matters discussed in front of your poor Uber driver. You can't be as open as you could be if it was just you in that car. Now, leasing or renting a car is like having a dedicated endpoint or using a managed service. So you get a little more control over the performance and you can get control over the exact amount of throughput you need in a given amount of time, but you're still using infrastructure that somebody else is managing. So you get a little more control than you do with just the hosted API shared model, but you don't have full control or ownership over the infrastructure. Now, with owning a car or ownership, this is where you move from hitting an API endpoint to now running a full-blown system. Owning means you're running a model and you own the full infrastructure stack that model is running on. But with that ownership and with being responsible for that entire stack comes a lot more responsibility that we didn't have to deal with when we were just pointing to or using the ChatGPT chatbot interface. You have to think about how am I going to scale? You have to procure hardware. You have to think about GPU utilization and all of these things that the API access just abstracted away from you. And sometimes you need that abstraction and sometimes you need that abstraction layer to be taken away. Now, all of these options, so this is like the most investment, but you get the most amount of granular level of control. All of these options, owning, leasing, hitting the API endpoint, there's none that are best. There's no one that is like the best option. In most cases, you have use cases for ChatGPT and you have use cases for needing to run a model locally. Even at the developer level, like not thinking about an enterprise organization, you might not have Wi-Fi all of the time. Maybe you want to run a small local model on your laptop for little projects that you might have. And then sometimes if you have a larger project or maybe in the context of work, you're using the Claude Code extension in your VS Code IDE. So it's not about choosing one or the other, it's about figuring out which makes sense based on your requirements and what your different use cases are. And running your own models, it's certainly not a new thing, but what is new in the last couple of years is being able to run your own models and own your infrastructure in a way that is actually feasible and performant. So one of the things that has made this more feasible is that the model capabilities have really expanded over the last couple of years. So if you think back before, like 2 years ago, we really didn't have very capable open source models available to use for you to just pull down and run on your infrastructure. But in the last 2 years, we've seen really awesome models come out. We have like the GPT-OSS OpenAI model, we have DeepSeek models, Qwen, Google's come out with models, models, NVIDIA models. There's so many great options that are faster to run. They're going to be much smaller in size than the proprietary frontier models. They're cheaper, they're quicker. And in most cases, they're actually very performant for real production use cases. So the model choices that we have now has really helped us a lot. And in addition to the model capabilities, the infrastructure has caught up as well. So we have really great open source technology like VLLM at the inference server layer, LLMD for the distributed inference layer, and then we have API gateway technology to help you manage access to the model internally. So you can even set up your kind of own internal ChatGPT service for your internal teams to easily access while you own the entire infrastructure. So a lot of things have advanced in the last couple of years. There's never one single reason that somebody moves to host their own model. So I just want to ask, we think about, when does this all actually matter? When do I need to think about hosting my own models? When should I care about this? It's not just one thing. Maybe you have compliance restrictions that prevent you from hitting an external API endpoint. Maybe your scale is so big that the cost per token of these frontier models has become a bit out of hand and doesn't quite make sense anymore. Or maybe you're not hitting your SLOs. Maybe you have latency targets that you can't hit anymore using the managed services, and you need to have tighter control over the deployments. There's a lot of different reasons, but it's not just one thing in isolation. It's kind of multiple things that accumulate and then kind of reach a breaking point to prompt you to change your approach. So I want to provide a little bit of a decision framework here to give a little bit of clarity. So you should stay with hosted APIs. Typically when you're at the experimentation pilot phase, maybe your traffic is on the lower end, or maybe it's more unpredictable. You're not hitting like thousands of users maximum throughput constantly. You have a little more flexibility there. You might move to a managed service offering if you need more performance reliability and you're trying to scale, but you're not ready, or you simply don't need to commit to owning the entire infrastructure stack. And then typically when you're starting to think about hosting your own models, there's a number of reasons, but it might be you have really high scale usage, so really sustained throughput across whatever your use case might be. The cost per token has become a problem, or your latency targets aren't where they need to be. Or in many situations, it has to do with the privacy requirements, and you simply need to be in control of your model deployments in the same location as where your data resides, and you being in control of that communication back and forth. So this is kind of how I think about it. It's really not a binary decision. It's not, do I do hosted or do I do self-hosted? In most cases, you're doing multiple approaches in different use case areas of your business or as an individual. So it's really about having the awareness and being able to understand your architecture and understand when things need to change and evolve. Thank you so much. Feel free to connect with me. I wanted to throw up the developers newsletter QR code for you to join our Red Hat AI developers newsletter. We send a lot of cool info out about open source projects that we're working on. And yeah, have a good time.